Hello everyone and welcome to Big Rock Moto. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Since KTM introduced their 950 Adventure way back in 2003, KTM have arguably been the leader in off-road oriented adventure motorcycles. Over the years since then, their V-twin powered adventure bikes have created many loyal riders from around the world. In 2021, KTM introduced a brand new 1290 Super Adventure in two different variants, the off-road oriented R model and the road oriented S model. For just over $20,000, you get a 160 horsepower, fire-breathing V-twin engine, very capable off-road suspension and chassis, these innovative saddle-style fuel tanks which lower the center of gravity, you get class-leading electronics, amazing brakes, and a whole lot more. Now, I recently published an in-depth first ride video. So today's video will focus on the aspects that I didn't get to cover in that episode. So today we're going to cover models and prices, the ergonomics, the specs and features, the maintenance. We'll summarize the pros and cons. We'll offer insights into its main competitors. We'll also answer the questions you send in. And finally, we'll wrap up with some final thoughts and I'll tell you whether or not I would buy this. All right, let's cover models and pricing really quick for the 1290 Super Adventure. And I apologize for having to check the notes on my phone, but I just want to make sure I get things right. So in 2021, KTM redesigned their 1290 Adventure. So it replaced the bike before that and is really a whole new, almost ground up new motorcycle for 2021 in both the R and the S variants. So the previous V-twin powered KTM adventure bikes you had, going back you had the 950 Adventure, the 990 Adventure. They came out with an 1190 Adventure, then a 1090 Adventure, and then finally a 1290 Adventure. So we've seen this growth in their V-twin models. This 1290 for 2021 and onwards replaces pretty much all of those previous V-twin models. KTM also introduced around 2018 a new parallel twin powered series of adventure bikes, 790s and then now the 890s, and those kind of replace the smaller V-twins like the 950s and the 990s in the lineup. So for 2024 here in the USA for pricing, the S model is $20,299 and the R model, this model you see here, is $20,999. Now, what are the differences between the R model and the S model? They're very different motorcycles. To start out with, the R model, let's talk about suspension. On the R model, you get manually adjustable, longer travel suspension front and back. The S model, you get electronically controlled suspension with shorter travel. Next big thing, the wheel sets. So the R model is going to have this 21 18-inch combo with tubeless spoked rims. The S model is going to come with a 19-inch front wheel, an 18-inch rear wheel, and those are going to be cast rims more for that road-oriented use. Of course, the R model with this longer travel suspension and more off-road chassis is giving you a higher seat height. Also, the windshield is shorter on the R model, though you can put on a larger windshield if you want. Differences in equipment, there's quite a number of those. Especially, I want you to know that the S model, you get adaptive cruise control. The R model, you cannot get that, which is kind of a bummer. All right, seat height, ergonomics, drop test on the 1290 Super Adventure R. I'm going to try to combine these segments and we'll see how this goes, and if it works, I'll use this in future videos. Seat height is 34.6 or 880 millimeters. Pretty tall, right? You see that with adventure bikes. The more off-road you get, the higher your seat gets because you need that ground clearance. And it feels maybe even a little bit taller than that. And it is a little bit, I don't want to say it's top heavy because it's not relative to its competitors, but just it's 550 pounds. It's 245 kilos. Like it does feel heavy. So the bike's on a center stand. Let me get on here and show you the riding position. Riding position is super roomy, tons of leg room, nice upright position, extremely comfortable. What I like is you can adjust the handlebars. KTM gives you adjustable handlebars. There are forward and aft positions, and of course you could also rotate the bars. So you should be able to find a good position for yourself. Bar risers, if you know me, you know I hate bar risers. Please don't use those. There's certain situations where you might need them, but for standing up, like I'd probably move these bars a little forward, but very, very good. You know, I am 5'10" or 1.78 meters, and so that gives you a sense of things. All right, so this is the new way of doing this, but I want to try it. So I'm going to kind of lean the bike over as far as I can until I feel like I can't hold it up anymore, to give you a sense of kind of the weight and sort of the hold up factor, if you will. And then you can also kind of see how it drops, and we'll see how it is to lift, even though we did this kind of already in the first ride. So right about there, that's as far as I can go. Okay, so you can see it kind of rests on the crash bar there. It's a heavy bike. Let me try lifting it up. Put the bike in gear. Put the kickstand down. Ah, man, it's heavy. Ooh, that's a tough lift. It's maybe a little bit easier than a Tiger 1200 or a Multistrada V4. It's not as good as like a GS because you've got the cylinders on those. It feels heavier than an Africa Twin to me. So you got to be pretty strong to lift this by yourself. If you're going to ride this bike off-road, take friends with you in case you need to lift it up. Right, so riding the KTM 1290 Super Adventure R at nighttime, looking at the headlight, the controls, talk about the cornering lights. So the switchgear is illuminated. You can see that, well, let me stop for a second. That'll be a little bit easier. So you can see not everything's illuminated, like the kill switch is not illuminated, but the ignition, the hazard lights, the back button cruise control, the rocker switch, cruise control buttons, but like the turn signal and the horn, they're not illuminated. So that's kind of interesting. I do like having it, and you can adjust the brightness of that, which I have turned up all the way. The dashboard, of course, adjusts the different brightness depending on the ambient light levels. So now let's ride the bike and talk about the lighting. So we do have pretty powerful LED headlights, a high and low beam. What we also have is cornering lights. So I hope you can kind of see these in the video here, but it's lighting up on the sides of the road. So the bike has a sensor, it knows how much you're leaning, and it activates those little cornering lights to guide you around the corners. It does help quite a bit. Very effective. Now, there's other systems that are better, but this is pretty good. There's the high beam. So the low beam has a pretty sharp cutoff, but it has pretty good illumination to the sides and the front, pretty bright, but I just can't see very far, so it's very scary to really ride with the low beam. Of course, you can adjust it. Then the high beam gives you some pretty good illumination. So with the high beam combined with the cornering lights on this mountain road at night, I can go at a moderate pace. I definitely can't go as fast as I would during the day. That's just not going to be possible. Even with extra lights, you still can't do that. But I would say the factory lighting is above average for a motorcycle. Some other bikes in this class have some pretty fancy lights. This is not quite as good as the 1300GS that I have, but it's close. It's pretty good. And I really like that they gave us the cornering feature. It goes in stages too, so as you lean over more, you get more cornering light. So again, low beam, high beam. I have to ride on a high beam to really see ahead. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with the lighting. Overall, this is a pretty good motorcycle to ride at night because of some of the extra features that it has. Okay, the specs real quick on the 1290 Super Adventure R for 2024. The engine, it's a 2-cylinder V-twin, a 75-degree V-twin, 4-stroke, liquid-cooled. Displacement 1,301 cc. Power is 160 horsepower or 118 kilowatts at 9,000 RPM. Torque is 102 foot-pounds or 138 Newton-meters at 6,500 RPM. Clutch, you get a slip assist clutch, hydraulic actuation. Note that on the 890 and 790s you get a cable clutch, so it's nice to see the hydraulic clutch here on the upscale model. Fuel consumption that KTM rates, and exactly, it's funny, I've been getting exactly what they've rated in my testing, 41.3 miles a gallon or 5.7 liters per 100 kilometers. The weight, so the wet weight, fully fueled up, ready to ride, somewhere between 540 to 550 pounds or 245 to 250 kilograms. Your fuel tank capacity is 23 liters or 6.1 US gallons. You have ABS brakes front and back, of course, with switchable ABS. Of course, you've got the rally mode, the switchable traction control. We'll get into all that here in a minute. For the braking system on the front, you have 4-piston Brembo calipers on each side. So you have dual 320mm discs there on the front. In the back, you get Brembo as well with a 267mm disc. Ground clearance is very generous on the R model for 9.5 inches or 242 millimeters, 62.1 inch wheelbase or 1,578 millimeters, seat height 34.6 or 880, which we're showing in the other segment. Steering head angle is 25.3 degrees, which I thought was a little steep for an off-road adventure bike, but the bike seems to do just fine with it. And then your suspension travel front and back, keeping in mind this R model has more than the S, you get 220 millimeters or 8.7 inches front and rear. Okay, let's talk briefly about the maintenance requirements on a KTM. There's kind of this myth out there that European motorcycles are higher maintenance than maybe Japanese motorcycles. That's really not the case. You know, maintenance intervals have gotten, somewhat equivalent across the board when you look at motorcycles out there. So the minor service interval on the KTM 1290, this is your oil change, basic checks. KTM is saying 9,000 miles or 15,000 kilometers. Now, personally, I wouldn't go that far on oil on a motorcycle. I don't even go that far in my car or my truck, but that's up to you. Then your major service interval is 18,000 miles or 30,000 kilometers. That's going to be your valve inspection interval. That gets a lot more involved, pulling off the fuel tank, opening up the top of the engine, getting in there to check your valves. Air filter access, so they remedied this. The previous V-twin bikes, the 1090s, 1190s, 1290s previous to this, I think you had to remove the fuel tank to get to the air filter, and then there was aftermarket solutions to try to work around that. It was kind of a mess. They fixed it. So now the air filter is under a little cover, under the little cell phone holder in the front. I'll try to put a little picture here. Very, very convenient to get to. Other than that, for maintenance, you've got your typical stuff, brake fluids, hydraulic fluids, chain drive. You're going to have a chain drive here as opposed to some of the competitors that have shaft. So you do have to maintain your chain tension and try to keep your chain nice and clean. Make sure you replace that chain when it gets worn out. All right, let's take a little tour around the 1290 Super Adventure R. Show you some of the cool things about this bike. I've given you the specs already, so we're not going to go too far into it. You do get this low front fender, which gives it the very rally look. There was always a concern that mud or sticks could get jammed in here, and really serious off-road riders will often prefer a higher fender, but this is what you're going to have on most of the bikes in this class. The amazing Brembo brakes, obviously tubeless spoked wheels. The radiators are up in here, under there, and then you can see the front of the V-twin engine kind of poking out. The skid plate, this is the factory skid plate. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the factory one. That's not an upgraded one. And it's decent. It's not too thick, but it gives you some decent coverage there, as you can see. I also really like these crash bars. They're highly effective, strong, they're mounted well, and they really work in the tip over, as you're going to see in other parts of this, this review. And I really like that these come standard. In some countries, I'm unsure if they come standard. Here in the US, here in the USA, they're standard equipment. I meant to start by showing you the lighting while I have the lights turned on. So we have incandescent, like old-fashioned turn signals. I do find that very strange that in 2024 we're still seeing that. I'd really like to see LEDs. You can see the running light kind of signature element up here with this shape, and then your high and low beams. And then these here are the cornering lights, which I'm showing in the nighttime riding segment. Then coming around to the back, you can see again incandescent rear turn signals and the rear tail light, brake light combination. Coming around this side, you can see the large saddle style fuel tank, size of the engine, brake pedal, foot pegs, which I believe come with a rubber dampened insert, but this bike doesn't have those right now. You can see the exhaust, which is very large on this bike, but that's because of Euro 5, Euro 6 emissions regulations, noise regulations. They have to do a lot to really meet those kind of regulations these days from governments around the world. So it's a challenge for the manufacturers. The seat, which has this cool orange stitching, I've heard from a lot of people that the passenger seating is really not very good or not very comfortable on this. I found the driver's seat to be average. I thought it was okay. Trellis style frame in orange, I think looks great. Passenger pegs here, which also, this bolts onto the main rear subframe. It's a detachable subframe, and then you've got the detachable passenger peg hangers that also hold the exhaust there. Rear rack, kind of small but usable. The grab handles, which I like having. The rear, oh, I forgot to turn my hazards off. The rear plate holder and light assembly. Rear tire and wheel. Sorry, the bike's a little dirty right now. I like on KTMs, they give you, if you're changing the tire, doing some repair, I have this little thing to rest the chain when you pull this off here to kind of hold that. That's clever. I like that feature. Let's see. Rear chain guard, rear shock. Oh yeah, the suspension adjustments. So here's the preload on the rear shock, and then the rear shock adjustments are going to be, I think, yeah, over here, kind of. Oh yeah, oops, I just did that. That comes off, so there you go. And to get your adjustments there for your compression damping, and then the rebound damping is a screw down here at the bottom. The bike comes factory with the center stand. That's great. It's such a handy thing to have. You can see I've got the bike parked on a center stand now. You can get another view of the skid plate here and kind of some of the mounting for the skid plate, the oil filter, shift lever. So, you know, all the usual stuff you kind of expect. And then your front suspension adjustments, you have adjustments here at the top. So the Explorer has a separate function fork. So you have compression over here, rebound over here, and you have these preload adjusters, which are wonderful to have. And I've shown how those work in other parts of this review in the first ride video, where you can adjust your preload to change the ride height of the front of the bike and dial in the geometry for the handling that you're trying to achieve. So really appreciate having that. Okay, the controls of the bike. So you have cruise control trigger switches here, which I really like how they did that. You've got plus and minus here on the back, which you can't really see. Some more controls here, back button, cruise control button, the flash to pass, high beams, toggle, four-way controller, enter switch. A lot of these are backlit, which I'm showing in the other segment. Horn, turn signals, and over here you've got the hazard lights, the ignition button, and then the stop, start, kill switch to start the engine. So now I want to talk about the TFT and the electronics. I'll try to be as brief as I can with this. So I've got the ignition turned on, and I apologize for the glare on the screen. It's a reflective screen. It's a glossy finish, so it just reflects. And I've tried to fix that with the camera, but I just can't seem to get it to not reflect. So to get you oriented on this, you've got a big tachometer, you've got warning lights up here, a gear indicator, temperature gauge, the riding mode, the fuel level here, and then across the bottom you've got what they call your favorites. You can configure these to be whatever you want. I have tire pressures, trip mileage, and then consumption, fuel consumption, so I like that. Now on the controls, oh, I forgot to mention you have these, the C1 and C2 is a quick select to do your settings, so you can configure that how you want. So let me show you how that works now. So to get into the menu system of the bike, you just hit the enter button here, and I'm gonna have to switch you back to this view, and then you're gonna get a screen that says bike info, trip info, motorcycle, which is like ride mode, ABS, traction control, and then in this menu at the bottom, which is all your settings, custom switch. Let me show you this. I'm going to skip over the stuff about the infotainment, like the navigation and phone controls and music, because this video would be way too long. So if we go in here to bike info, we can see our tire pressures, water temperature, fuel range, oil, battery, odometer, service warnings, all that kind of stuff. So let's go back out of that. Then if we go to, there's trip info, you can go through your trip info. Motorcycle, this is going to be, you can go in here and you can do your ride modes, your ABS mode, your traction control and motor slip regulation. So let's go ahead and get out of that. If I go into sort of the settings thing at the bottom, so let's see, custom switch. So custom switch, this is what I was telling you about. This is the C1, C2 over here. So if I go into that, I can configure what I want for C1 and C2. I have it set up as ride mode and ABS mode. I find that to be the best, but depending on your situation, you may program different things. But I really like having that, because the thing is, when your hand's over here by the front brake and throttle, you have easy access to this trigger button. I will tell you that sometimes you accidentally hit this when you're riding and you don't mean to, because your glove just hits this and you activate your settings feature, but it's not that big of a deal. Favorites, this is going to be the stuff across the bottom of the screen like we showed, so you can configure that how you want. Tire pressure monitor settings. So what I love here is that you can configure the tire pressure warning. So if you're an off-road rider, you can turn the warnings off. So I have them turned off so that when I have my pressures lower for dirt, I don't get the warnings coming up. This is the only bike I've ever ridden that has this feature, and I love this. So you can set custom settings or turn them off. Really great. Anti-relay attack, because you don't want to be attacked by relays. It's a real big problem nowadays, you know, especially in the inner city areas. And then the display theme, so you can do night, automatic, or automatic mode. I like to leave it in night because I like the dark background. You can change your button illumination, which is great, how bright you want your buttons. That would be these to be backlit. And then your Bluetooth configuration, you can turn quick shifter off and on, hill hold control off and on, a great feature. Shift light, cornering light test, which allows you to test the cornering lights. I don't know why they really have that, but that's cool. Clock and date, units, language, extra functions. So that's pretty much a tour of how this works. So in real life, you know, you're going to have your ride mode, your ABS, which I have set up over here. Your basic controls, your cruise control is easy to get to. So it's really an intuitive and well-designed electronic system, and this TFT is excellent. All right, so how does the 1290 Super Adventure R stack up against its main competitors? So in usual Big Rock Moto fashion, what I did was I created this comparison chart, which I printed out here for myself to reference. I'm going to have this below as a download. You can download it. I'm also going to put it up here on the screen so you can see it. It's probably going to block most of my face, which is no big loss. So the main competitors to the 1290 Adventure are, and again, we'll cover the S version in a future video. I think these are the 5 main competitors that I've identified. The Africa Twin Adventure Sports 1100, the BMW R1300GS, Ducati Multistrada V4, Triumph Tiger 1200 Rally Pro, and Harley Davidson Pan America Special. So a lot of this comparison is really going to come down to what are you looking for in a motorcycle? What are the things that you personally are prioritizing? How much power do you need? What kind of features are you looking for? You know, what's your budget? All these things come into play when you're making this choice. You may have brand loyalties, so you have to consider all that. If we look at value, so just value for money, I know I keep saying this in this review, the KTM really does, if you look at performance per dollar, the KTM on this list is the best. For $21,000, if you look at the power, you look at the on and off-road capability of it, the features that it has, the electronics package, it's the best value, okay? Engine types. So the KTM and Harley use V-twins. The Tiger uses an inline 3. The Ducati is a V4. The GS is a boxer twin. The Africa Twin is a parallel twin. So you really have the gamut of different engine choices here that you can choose from. Power, you know, the KTM and the Ducati are the most powerful, followed behind by the Tiger and the Harley, and then the GS. Torque, the GS is king for torque, although the KTM is not too far behind. You also have to consider what kind of final drive do you want. Are you okay with chain maintenance, or do you want a shaft drive? If you want shaft drive, it's going to limit your options. You're going to be looking at a GS or a Tiger. You could also put the Yamaha Super Tenere in here as well, I suppose, which I probably should have included here. The weight, they're all about the same weight, except the Harley, which is considerably heavier. Fuel capacity, again, you know, they all have, I mean, the GS has the worst in terms of like fuel capacity or fuel range. It's a little bit small. Do you want adaptive cruise control? You know, you can get that on the GS and on the Ducati, but not any of the other bikes here. So I've ranked the bikes in order of what I think they are the best in the category. So 1 would be the best. So this is not a point system, this is a ranking system. So off-road on this list, the KTM is the best. On-road on this list for performance, not for comfort, which is the next line, but performance, the Ducati is the best performer on the road. So I've ranked these out. So like the KTM comes first off-road, third on the road. Comfort, I have a bunch of these bikes tied for like 3rd place because I really couldn't distinguish between them. And I have personally tested all these bikes. The most fun is the KTM, followed by, I think, the Ducati and the Triumph. Just the engines have so much to do with that. How they sound, how they feel, how fast it is, the sense of speed. So those things. So again, you can take this information and make your own decision. Of course, people want to talk about reliability. Like I've said in the other segments, I really can't get into that. But I hope this little comparison chart gives you some indication of what bike on this list might be right for you. All right, let's do audience questions. I put out a post on YouTube a few weeks ago asking for audience questions about this bike. So let me answer all the main questions that I saw there in those comments. And thank you, by the way, for sending in your questions. There were a lot of questions about reliability. Look, I mean, unfortunately, I really can't speak to that. I'm just not in a position to speak to that. You can do your own research on that. Obviously, I haven't had any issues in the small time that I've had it, but I'm not an owner of the bike, and this is not a long-term test. Ownership, there was a lot of questions about ownership and maintenance. I think there's a myth that KTMs are hard to maintain. They're actually some of the easiest bikes to work on and maintain of any out there. And I've owned just about every brand and worked on just about every brand because I do my own work. They're very easy to work on. The ownership stuff that gets into the reliability, and I really can't speak to that so much. There were questions about seating comfort. The seat comfort I found to be average. Not great, but also not bad. And frankly, it's a personal thing. This person says, does it feel faster than the rivals? Can you just cruise or relax on this bike? Or does it always want to go fast? use your cruise control. You can cruise, but as you saw in my ride videos, it's pretty hard to control yourself. So use your cruise control and just try to take a chill pill. How is this versus the 890, 901 or other mid-size adventure bikes? So that's the right question. That's a tough question. I think that you have to decide, number one, what is your budget? How are you going to use the bike? How much power is acceptable to you? How much weight is acceptable to you? Do you want a lighter weight bike or heavier weight bike? Are you touring with a passenger and luggage, or are you riding by yourself? Depending on how you answer all those questions would push me to recommend either this heavyweight or a midweight adventure bike. If you're doing a lot of off-road, go with the midweight adventure bikes. If you're riding mostly by yourself, go with the middleweights. If you're riding two up, passengers, a lot of luggage, yeah, the big bikes come into play. If you're riding a lot on the street, the big bikes come into play. Higher speeds, 80, 90, 100 miles an hour, 140 plus kilometers an hour cruising stuff. If you live somewhere where you can do that, the big bikes come into play. Something like an 890 feels much lighter, much easier to manage, doesn't want to tip over as much when you're leaned over. You're not going to drop it as much off-road, less intimidating, but this is more fun. So all those things you have to consider. This person says, should I wait for a 1390 adventure? We don't know for sure that that's coming. I would assume so, based on the fact they have the KTM Duke 1390, Super Duke GT. I don't believe in waiting. I believe in enjoying the bike now, and you probably get a better deal buying this than you will 1390. But it just depends on, do you want that extra 10 or 20 horsepower? I think that if KTM comes out with a 1390 Super Adventure R, I think I'm buying one. I think that would push me over the edge. Throttle smoothness, very, very good throttle response on this bike. No issues with that. Off-road compared to direct competitors. This is the best off-road big adventure bike, period, no contest. Is it worth more money to get a GS? Look, you get a GS if you want that luxury features, the refinement, the stuff that comes with BMW. You get the longer warranty, you get the dealers that BMW has. It's a different ownership experience, a different riding experience. You get that kind of riding on clouds ride on the highway. It's not as good off-road as this. It's not as fun as this, but it's a little bit more grown up, a little bit more comfortable, a little bit, smoother. So you have to make those decisions. Also, this is the best value in the class. So for 20 grand, this is a lot of performance. Front wheel wobble at high speeds. I haven't seen that. If you're seeing a front wheel wobble on your motorcycle, there could be a lot of things. It could be tire balance. Maybe you have a defective tire. It could be suspension settings, preload, sag. Do you have bags on the back? Top boxes can cause the bike to wobble. Something loose in the suspension or the wheels or the axles. I mean, you see, my point is, I don't know what's causing the wobble you're experiencing. There's so many variables at play, but I didn't find any stability issues with this. Value and wow factor, are they worth the reliability concerns? For me, they would be yes. I would take the chance. That's just me. Can you put down 160 horsepower on dirt? No, and that's why it's reduced in those dirt off-road ride modes. Do the low fuel tanks improve handling? Yes, a lot. More difficult to ride off-road than a 690 or 890? Absolutely. Takes more concentration. There's more penalty to pay if you make a mistake. Yes, it is harder to ride. It's very capable, but it does take more effort to ride it. Why do 160 horsepower off-road bikes exist, and who needs them? We don't need them. We also don't need Porsche 911s or Ferraris or Mercedes or nice houses or 85-inch TVs, but those things are nice and I want them. I can't afford them, but I want them and they're nice, and if you can afford it, I think you should get it. I love that this exists. Should I upgrade from my 1090 or 1190 or previous gen 1290? My short answer is yes. This is so much better than those bikes in every possible way. I'd recommend upgrading if you can. All right, the pro and con summary, or the review summary for the 1290 Super Adventure R. The pros, number one for me, the engine, simply phenomenal. One of the best motorcycle engines I've ever had the pleasure of operating. The handling, this bike handles really sharp, really well, both on-road and off-road. Superb handling. Suspension. The suspension on this bike, especially for off-road riding, is really legitimately good. And you can't say the same for a lot of the competitors out there where they just spring the bikes too softly. They're undersprung. This bike, for an average size American rider, I think the spring rates are good. The suspension's well damped. You have good adjustments. You can ride this bike fast off-road for such a big heavy bike. Great job on the suspension, KTM. The electronics package, it's the best electronics of any adventure bike, full stop. Why is that? Well, it's easy to use, intuitive, but also you have the rally mode with 9-level traction control, adjustable on the fly. It's like magic. With a bike with this much power, you know, over 100 horsepower in off-road mode or 160 horsepower unrestricted, traction control is your best friend. We've talked about that. Use the electronics to your advantage. This has the best electronics package of any adventure bike. Also, the TFT dash, I didn't have them in my notes. The TFT on this is one of the best. It's big, bright, legible, and easy to use. Another pro for me on this bike are the brakes. The brakes are phenomenal on this bike, extremely powerful, some of the best in the class. And finally, the last pro for me is that this is the best off-road big adventure bike by a pretty big margin. So that could be a pro if you're looking for something for off-road. What are the downsides? So I'm really kind of like struggling to come up with the downsides here, and I'm kind of nitpicking because frankly, I haven't found many downsides in my time testing this bike. Keep in mind, I'm just a tester, I'm not an owner, so obviously check owner reviews if you really want to know the truth about stuff. For me, the fuel economy, it's not great. I mean, it's acceptable, 41 miles a gallon. It's not good as some of its rivals who can get 45 to 50. The engine heat, there's a little bit of engine heat, but honestly not much more than any of the competition. And it's not as bad as a KTM 890, actually. Tires are going to wear out fast. Because the bike has so much horsepower, it's not really the bike's fault. It's just that if you use that horsepower, you're going to burn up those adventure tires really, really quickly. Another pro, you might lose your license. Thankfully, I did not lose my license during this test. There's been mixed reports about reliability on the 1290s. I'm going to leave that to you to research because I don't really want to, for a lot of reasons, I just can't really speak to that. I don't own this bike. And so in the time I've had it, obviously there's been no problems. Also the comfort. The comfort is not as good as some of the rivals, but it's acceptable. And actually I was surprised how comfortable it actually is, seeing as it's kind of that off-road oriented bike. Final thoughts on KTM's 1290 Super Adventure R. If it isn't obvious by now, I love this motorcycle. It is It is one of the most fun motorcycles I've ever had the pleasure of riding, and I've ridden and tested quite a lot of bikes, and I'm very privileged to have been able to do that. It's really good off-road, it's really good on-road, it makes you smile, it makes you laugh. If you look at what you're getting for the money, all the components, all the performance, it's incredible. This is the best value adventure bike, maybe that I've ever tested, if you consider that price and value are two different things. Although the price is a bit high, you have to compare it to the competition. When you compare this to the competition, this is so much more bike dollar for dollar than the bikes it competes with. What are the downsides? Well, we've talked about some of them, and honestly, in the time I've had this, which granted has only been less than a month, I haven't really come across too many downsides. So I'm curious, if you're an owner of one of these bikes, let me know, are there any downsides to this? Because it almost seems a little bit too good to be true. Now, it's not as comfortable as a GS. It's not quite as good for sport touring as a Multistrada V4. And you can make all these comparisons, but overall the performance of this thing is phenomenal. Now, would I buy this bike? Yes, I would buy this tomorrow probably if I had the money and if I had the time to ride it with all the other bikes that I have for testing and the bikes that I own. I would buy one. And like I said in the previous segment, I think that if they come out with a 1390 Super Adventure, I think it's going to just push me over the edge, and I'm going to get the 1390 Super Adventure if they come out with that. Because if they take this and just improve and make it even more powerful, I don't see how I can resist. Well, I hope this review has been useful and informative. Please consider supporting independent journalism here at Big Rock Moto. There's ways to do that down in the description and a pinned comment below. And I really appreciate all of you guys' and gals' support. It means a lot to me. Thank you so much for watching. Ride safe, and I'll see you out there.